Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today's discussion continues our mini-series focused on dovetailing, or harmonizing our lives with the Supreme. Last time we ended with the important point that dovetailing, or yukta vairagya as it is known more scientifically, is the way in which we relate to Krishna on a personal level. It is the art of inviting Krishna into our daily lives. And we also discussed how the word dovetail actually means to fit or cause to fit together easily and conveniently. To illustrate the point, we talked about dovetail joints from the woodworking world and used the example to show how spiritual life is meant to be, a seamless integration of our lives with the Supreme. This time we promised to discuss the Sanskrit terms yukta vairagya, which translates to right or proper renunciation. And the reason we are discussing the concept of proper renunciation today is because dovetailing, it turns out, actually is the art of proper renunciation, but not renunciation in the sense that we may be thinking. At this point, since some of us were recently discussing the Bhagavad-gita, it may be helpful to refer to the storyline of the Gita itself. At the beginning of the text, Arjuna, one of the two main speakers of the Gita, feels overwhelmed and does not wish to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. He wants to renounce fighting. He wants to renounce doing his duty as a warrior prince or a kshatriya. Now, as a leader of society, Arjuna has a duty to protect his citizens from people who are ill-intentioned, but he is trying to shirk that duty at the beginning of the Gita. He tells Krishna that perhaps he should just renounce acting altogether and retreat to the forest to meditate on the Supreme and achieve full spiritual realization that way. But importantly, Krishna tells Arjuna that Arjuna's misunderstanding what real renunciation is, and that actually Arjuna can spiritually advance while acting, while fighting, and doing his duty on that battlefield. So what is real renunciation? As Arjuna's suggestion to Krishna brings up, when he wanted to renounce the battlefield and renounce fighting, sometimes we may think, well, I could live a spiritual life if I only didn't have school or work or so many things to do, parenting, driving here, there, running errands. And so a lot of people save investigating spirituality for later in life, thinking that they'll get to it when they can renounce some of their mundane activities. However, in the Gita, we learn that real renunciation involves performing our duty, going about our daily lives, but renouncing material consciousness in favor of spiritual consciousness while we go about our lives. Remember that when we connect everything to Krishna via Bhakti Yoga, that is considered spiritual consciousness. By contrast, when we see things, people, and activities as having no connection with Krishna, that is considered material consciousness. The Gita's message, Krishna's message, is that we don't actually need to renounce school or work, family, houses, cars, etc., in order to live a spiritual life. Rather, we simply adjust our consciousness around these things. We practice seeing all of the things and activities in our lives, including our talents and abilities, as being provided by the Supreme. And then we consciously offer them in service to the Supreme. We connect everything in our lives back to the source, Krishna, and this creates true harmony in our lives. What's nice and powerful about yukta vairagya, or dovetailing, is that it really comes down to our consciousness while we go about our lives. We're so busy, so this process is practical and adapts to our busy lives. On any given day, we're bombarded by everything that's going on around us. Work, emails, school, text messages, Facebook, Instagram, television, phones buzz, laptops provide us with internet, which can take us anywhere in 0.35 seconds. Literally, I Googled the word life to arrive at that number. So, the secret is to convert these otherwise material mundane activities into spiritual ones by shifting our consciousness. The question becomes, how can I use everything in my life properly? Bhakti Yoga gives us the spiritual intelligence to figure out a way, guided by our teachers or gurus, as well as the other Bhakti Yoga practitioners, and by the Gita and other Bhakti texts, to connect the things in our lives back to the Supreme. For instance, we all like to listen to music. It's a thing we do anyway, so perhaps we can add in some kirtan or mantra meditation set to music to our day. If we like to read, we can set a goal of reading a little from the Bhagavad-gita every day. There are so many ways to change the consciousness around the daily things we like to do or that we have to do anyway. In our discussion about chanting the Maha Mantra, we talked about purifying our consciousness. And we talked about that then because chanting itself purifies our consciousness. Thus, our consciousness is really important. In fact, consciousness is actually the great differentiator, the determining factor that colors any and all actions, also our thoughts, habits, etc. Our consciousness while we act affects our actions, affects ourselves, and affects those around us. 3 people can be doing the same activity externally, but have a very different consciousness while performing it. Take 3 teachers in 3 different classrooms. Let's say an interviewer comes by and asks each of them, "What are you doing right now?" And let's say the first one responds, "Can't you see? I'm trying to teach these lazy kids." The second one says, "I am earning my living." And the third one says, "I'm doing something very meaningful, helping shape the world's future." In all of these examples, the activity of teaching is the same, but each of the teachers has a different vision of their work, a different consciousness, a different reason for performing their work. In Bhakti Yoga, we shift our consciousness to the Supreme, Krishna, while acting in the world. In the Gita, Krishna says, "Manmana bhava mad bhakto, madhyaji mang namaskuru." Always think of me and become my devotee. He gives us the ultimate focus for our consciousness right there. If we can shift our consciousness to the Supreme throughout our days and activities, remembering that this human life is meant for reconnecting to Him, then we are practicing real or proper renunciation. Before practicing Bhakti Yoga, we may just be acting for ourselves, or for our parents, or our teachers, whatever the motivating factor is, or whomever it is. But we're always serving someone. Once we start shifting to acting in order to make spiritual advancement, and not just material advancement, then we are on our way to mastering the art of dovetailing. And in this way, we spiritualize our normal life without externally changing much. We add in certain practices like chanting the Maha Mantra, or reading the Gita, or consciously offering our vegetarian foodstuffs to Krishna. But we aren't subtracting from our lives when we practice this real renunciation or yukta vairagya. Instead, we're enriching our lives with spiritual practices and consciousness. Let's next turn to the Gita to understand the philosophy behind dovetailing a bit more. Since the Gita contains Krishna's instruction, it's a perfect source of spiritual knowledge for us. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport or explanation to chapter 5, verse 29, Krishna consciousness, or Bhakti Yoga, brings one into spiritual life even while one is within the jurisdiction of matter, for it is an awakening of spiritual existence by practice in the material world. And of course, this Where's Waldo art on screen is meant to depict the frenzy of the material world in which we find ourselves. So Srila Prabhupada's statement up here from the Gita refers to the fact that we can be in the world but not of it in terms of our consciousness. And there is a more vivid example given in the Gita that we'll look at next time in this regard. But the word that Srila Prabhupada uses up there, practice, is an important one. Bhakti Yoga is a practice. Our daily lives and activities can be our Bhakti Yoga practice if we allow them to be. And why shouldn't they be? If we think about it, we have to act anyway, even if just to feed ourselves. Krishna states in the Gita that everyone has to act in this world. We are active by nature. Even choosing to renounce the world, which is what Arjuna at first proposes to Krishna in the Gita, that itself is an action, renunciation of the world. And in fact, if we artificially renounce the world and say, try to live in an austere way, our minds would still be active and meditating on things which please us. In other words, even if our bodies weren't traveling, our minds would be. So that renunciation, that kind of false renunciation, is not a practical spiritual path forward for us. Krishna tells Arjuna that since Arjuna's nature is to fight and protect his citizens, then if Arjuna didn't fight in the battle of Kurukshetra on the side of good, on the side of Krishna, then Arjuna's fighting tendency would crop up again somehow in the future, but in a less than ideal manner. So Krishna tells him that he should not give up action. Rather, Arjuna should definitely fight in this necessary battle. He should definitely act. However, as Krishna tells Arjuna, though we have a right to act, we are not entitled to the results of our actions. This is from the Gita, chapter 2, verse 47. What does this mean? Krishna tells Arjuna here that one who is a true renouncer still acts, still works in the world, but such a person gives up or renounces the results of action. And instead, we offer the results of our activities to the Supreme, to Krishna. In doing so, we link those actions to the Supreme. And this simple offering spiritualizes our activities. This is dovetailing, the act of seamlessly connecting our lives to the Supreme. Let's take an example to make this more real. Say you are studying hard for an exam or a certification for your career. If you're practicing Bhakti Yoga, you might have the consciousness that, Krishna, I'm doing my best here studying, but this class and certification is really important for my career. However, we must ultimately realize that the result doesn't depend on us after we've done our best to study for it. It's not in our hands, so what's the use of being attached to it? Therefore, whatever the result of our studying, whatever grade we get, we offer it to the Supreme. Of course, detachment from the results of our actions is easier said than done, and that's why it's a practice. Now, in the beginning, we will still be attached to the results of our actions most likely, but we can resolve to try to use the results in Krishna's service somehow. We can try to connect them somehow, and that also purifies our actions. Now, here's an important point. Say we don't do well on our exam or our certification. Well, whether we get an A or a C or we flat out fail, Krishna still accepts the effort we put in. And when we offer the results to him, our studying and time put in is still considered devotional service. While we might fail by material standards, there is no failure spiritually. Krishna accepts our sincere offering. He accepts our love and our attempts to reconnect with him. This is proper renunciation. Still working in the world, but renouncing the results of action by offering them to Krishna. One important thing to note is that when we do this, of course we still receive the results of our work. In other words, for example, we still get paid when we work, etc. However, detachment from the results at the level of our consciousness, by offering them to Krishna, is liberating. In fact, it frees us, and this factors into the why we would want to be detached from the results of our actions. You may think, well, I'm doing the action, so don't I deserve the results? However, it's actually in our best interest to offer the results to the Supreme, to be detached from the results for several reasons. One reason is, when we're so invested in the results of our work, with how much money we're getting, for instance, or with winning a competition, or with being first in other things in our life, when we're results driven, we're actually slaves to the results of our actions, and then we're also karmically bound by them. Remember from our karma class that material actions bind us to material reactions or results. We all probably know people who are results driven, and when they don't receive the results that they're acting or looking for, they become frustrated or angry. Such people are actually never happy because the results of any given activity could always be better, right? So what's the use of being controlled by the results? It's just a path towards never being satisfied, and it keeps us in the material world. Thus, Krishna proposes a better path, an alternate path, a spiritual path, and it's the one we've been discussing today. He suggests that we do our duty well, to the best of our ability, but that we offer the results to him. Whether we make the A on the exam or not, he accepts our sincere offering. This offering of the results of our actions to Krishna spiritualizes those actions. And spiritualized actions bind us to Krishna, unlike material actions, which bind us to the material results of our actions. Thus, when we spiritualize our actions in this way, we purify our existence and are freed from karmic reactions. This is real liberation, and this is what Bhakti Yoga has to offer us. And as a side effect of spiritualizing our activities, by offering the results of them to Krishna, our minds are set free in the sense that we can view the results of our actions in an equipoised manner, realizing that sometimes things work out in this material world and sometimes they don't. Now, importantly, as we hinted at before, when we connect the things in our daily lives to Krishna, it's not that we lose everything and that he takes everything away from us. We're never the loser when we spiritualize our lives. One example of this is that we're vegetarian, and we offer the meals we prepare to Krishna first, as we discussed last time. We all have to eat, and so we try to spiritualize our eating. So after cooking, we offer the meal to Krishna, and we also try to cook in such a way that we're conscious of the Supreme throughout the cooking process. Well, after offering the meal to Krishna, the meal is still left for us, and we call it prasadam, a word meaning mercy. The act of offering the meal to Krishna induced a shift in our consciousness, one that spiritualizes the whole action of cooking. As another example, sometimes we might say make a donation to a bhakti event or a bhakti temple, something like that. And in that case, our money actually does leave us, but spiritually we're full. Krishna notes everything we do to be conscious of him, and we advance spiritually in that way. Meanwhile, Krishna makes sure that everything also works out for us materially. Maybe not in the exact way that we planned, but he'll take care of us, and he reciprocates with our desires. Srila Prabhupada would say that Krishna ensures that the birds and animals have enough to eat and have their shelter. Do you think he won't provide for you if you're serving him? He does, and he will. And when we act for Krishna, we'll actually feel such inner fulfillment that it's hard to describe. Why? Well, to use an analogy, just as the hand feeds itself by feeding the body, we nourish and enrich our lives by offering our activities to Krishna, because he is our source. Krishna is the source of our existence and of our ability to act. In the Gita, in fact, Krishna says that he is ability in humankind, the ultimate source of our talents. So when we offer our actions to Krishna, it's like completing the circle. Our ability comes from him, we act, and then we offer our activities and their results to Krishna. And Krishna directly tells Arjuna that acting in devotional service is the way to go. He says in chapter 5, the renunciation of work and work in devotion are both good for liberation. But of the two, work in devotional service, or Bhakti Yoga, is better than renunciation of work. And this is important. Throughout the Gita, Krishna never says that we should give up action in order to be spiritual. Rather, in Bhakti Yoga, all of our actions are spiritualized. Krishna is very practical. Now, why is work in devotional service better than mere renunciation of action? Srila Prabhupada explains it nicely in the purport to this verse, which we've broken up into 3 points. He writes, Jnana, or knowledge that one is not this material body, but spirit soul, is not sufficient for liberation. One has to act in the status of spirit soul. Otherwise, there is no escape from material bondage. He adds that without Bhakti Yoga, mere renunciation of material activities does not actually purify the heart of a conditioned soul. What does this mean? Our hearts not being pure? Well, our hearts not being pure means we're still internally harboring material desires versus fully spiritual ones. But when we start acting spiritually, like with chanting the Maha Mantra and offering our activities to the Supreme, then these actions purify our hearts, replacing the material desires with spiritual ones. Remember from our karma class that actions can either purify or degrade us. But merely renouncing actions without any connection to Krishna doesn't purify us. Why not? Well, this leads us to the 3rd point. Srila Prabhupada writes that renunciation without Krishna consciousness or without Bhakti Yoga is incomplete. Why is it incomplete? Because a person who just renounces action but has not established his or her relationship with Krishna is missing the key point that everything belongs to the Supreme. Therefore, as written on screen, renunciation is complete when it is in the knowledge that everything in existence belongs to the Lord, and that no one should claim proprietorship or ownership over anything. What a different world it would be if everyone thought like this, right? There's not enough in this world for everyone's greed. Now this brings us to an interesting point. Since nothing in the world really belongs to us, where's the question of renunciation? How can we renounce that which isn't ours in the first place? This gives us a different perspective on things, doesn't it? So on that note, this is why in Bhakti Yoga, instead of renouncing everything to be spiritual, we try to complete the circle of action by using everything as best we can in service to Krishna, who is the source of everything anyway. We try to connect it back to him. This is the philosophy behind yukta vairagya, or proper renunciation, as it's presented in the Gita. One interesting point is that if we instead head to an isolated place and try to renounce the world artificially to be spiritual, that's termed palgu vairagya. In that case, we're renouncing things that could potentially be used in service to the Supreme. For instance, if we renounce owning a laptop or iPhone thinking that they're not spiritual items, then we may be missing out on opportunities to serve Krishna by using such items, like with these YouTube videos, for instance, or in listening to kirtan of the Maha Mantra or lectures on the science of Bhakti Yoga on YouTube and other platforms, etc. The point here is that there are right and wrong ways. There are spiritual and material ways to use a computer and many other things in the world around us, everything practically. But if we shift our consciousness to seeing the world as filled with ingredients that can be used in service to Krishna, that can really help us to start practicing this real renunciation, this yukta vairagya or dovetailing. Granted, not everything can be dovetailed. Just like we don't offer Krishna alcohol or meat or heroin or cocaine, things that bring our consciousness down. Everything is the energy of Krishna because he's the source of everything. But this doesn't mean that everything is necessarily prescribed for us to consume. Bhakti Yoga is the art of using things properly in service to Krishna. For instance, Sunshine is the energy of Krishna, but if we remain in it too long, we get badly burned, at least our bodies do, right? So we have to apply our intelligence. More importantly, though, we receive guidance and understanding from Guru, our teachers, and from Krishna himself, via his instructions in the Bhagavad-gita, about how to dovetail different things in this material world. Srila Prabhupada eloquently describes the concept of dovetailing or proper renunciation in his book, Nectar of Devotion. He writes in chapter 14, "One should not give up anything that can be utilized in the service of the Lord. That is a secret of devotional service. Anything that can be utilized in advancing Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga and devotional service should be accepted. For instance, we are using many machines for the advancement of our present Krishna consciousness movement. Machines like typewriters, dictating machines, tape recorders, microphones, and airplanes. Sometimes people ask us, why are you utilizing material products if you condemn the advancement of material civilization? But actually, we do not condemn. We simply ask people to do whatever they are doing in Krishna consciousness. This is the same principle on which in Bhagavad-gita, Krishna advised Arjuna to utilize his fighting abilities in devotional service. Similarly, we are utilizing these machines for Krishna's service. With such sentiment for Krishna or Krishna consciousness, we can accept everything. If the typewriter can be utilized for advancing our Krishna consciousness movement, we must accept it. Similarly, the dictating machine or any other machine must be used. Krishna is the cause and effect, and nothing belongs to us. Krishna's things must be used in the service of Krishna. That is our vision. And what an expansive vision it is, nothing narrow-minded at all. Bhakti is so expansive, actually. So we're going to pause here today, but stay tuned because next time we're going to look at an interesting analogy related to dovetailing that Krishna uses in the Gita. And it has to do with lotus flowers and the science behind them, all of which was, of course, invented by Krishna himself. So that will be a fun discussion. In the meantime, send along any questions you might have about dovetailing or about anything in the realm of Bhakti Yoga, and we can address those questions in one of our Q&A sessions coming up. Thank you again for listening today, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.